a homeless man saved a rich little girl's life. The next day, he woke up to find 3 black cars in front of his cardboard house. John walked through the cold, damp streets of the city, his face weathered by the wind and his eyes heavy with deep sorrow. Every corner, every building reminded him of the life he once had and lost in the blink of an eye. Years had passed since that tragic accident that took away his wife, Elena, and his son, Daniel. Since then, the city had become both his home and his prison. The neon lights and constant noise only accentuated his loneliness. His refuge was a hidden corner between 2 abandoned buildings, where some cardboard boxes and worn fabrics provided shelter. Despite his circumstances, John hadn't lost his humanity. Each day, he shared what little he had with others like him, especially with David, a man consumed by addiction. David often sat silently, his gaze distant and his hands trembling. John would offer him water, and when he could, some food. "You don't have to do this," David would occasionally murmur. "I know," John replied with a faint smile, "but no one should go through this alone." Meanwhile, in the city's most exclusive area, Isabella watched the world from her large room's window. At 8 years old, she was surrounded by everything money could buy: expensive toys, elegant dresses, and a room that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. However, none of that filled the void she felt. Her parents, Andrew and Maria, were business tycoons always engrossed in their work. Family dinners were silent and formal, if they even happened at all. Isabella's only constant companion was Camilla, her nanny. Camilla read her stories before bed and gently brushed her hair, but even she had limits to the affection she could provide. "Your parents love you in their own way," she would sometimes say, trying to justify their absences. Isabella nodded, though deep down she knew something was missing. She longed to run free, get her hands dirty, make friends, and have adventures beyond the walls of her mansion. John would often spend his afternoons in a neglected park, watching people pass by. He saw families walking together, children laughing and playing, and couldn't help but feel a pang in his heart. He wondered if he would ever overcome the pain that kept him anchored to the past. What was the point of moving forward when everything he loved was gone? One afternoon, while sharing a piece of bread with David, he said, "John, you need to find something to live for. You can't go on like this forever." John looked at him, surprised. "And what could that be?" he asked bitterly. David shrugged. "I don't know, but there's more to life than this place." John sighed without responding. David's words echoed in his mind more than he would have liked to admit. In the mansion, Isabella gazed at the sunset from her balcony. The colors of the sky were beautiful, yet unattainable. She decided to go down to the garden, escaping the guard's sight for a moment. She felt the grass beneath her feet and closed her eyes, imagining what it would be like to run aimlessly, without anyone stopping her. But soon, a firm voice interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Isabella, it's time to come inside," said one of the guards. With resignation, the girl returned indoors, where another silent night awaited her. That night, both John and Isabella looked up at the starry sky from very different places. One from an improvised bed of cardboard, the other from the comfort of her soft-sheeted bed. Both felt the same loneliness, the same yearning for something they couldn't name. John wondered if he would ever find a reason to heal his wounds. Isabella dreamed of a world where she could be free and loved. Fate, whimsical and mysterious, began to draw invisible lines connecting their lives. In a vast city where millions of stories intertwined, the tale of a homeless man and a rich girl was about to converge in a way that would change their worlds forever. Meanwhile, life continued its course. David sank deeper into his addiction, and John felt he was losing him little by little. "Don't let me fall, my friend," David pleaded one time, tears in his eyes. John squeezed his hand tightly. "I won't," he promised, though he wasn't sure how he would keep that promise. In the mansion, Andrew and Maria argued about business, oblivious to the sadness reflected in their daughter's eyes. Camilla watched Isabella with concern, but knew her position didn't allow her to interfere too much. One day they'll understand what they're losing, she thought to herself. Thus, amid parallel lives filled with different lacks, John and Isabella pressed on, unaware that their meeting would be the catalyst to give them both the purpose and freedom they sought. That morning, Isabella awoke with a sense of restlessness. The sun streamed through the enormous windows of her room, filling every corner with a warm glow. Yet that brightness contrasted sharply with the coldness she felt in her home. She dressed slowly, choosing a simple dress and comfortable shoes instead of the elegant attire her mother preferred. She went down the stairs to find the breakfast table impeccably set, but empty. Her parents had already left for their offices, as usual. Camilla smiled upon seeing her. "Good morning, Isabella. Ready for your classes today?" Isabella nodded, lacking enthusiasm. The private lessons with tutors were dull and lonely. She longed to attend a regular school, make friends, and play at recess. But she knew that was impossible. After breakfast, while Camilla organized the day's schedule, Isabella decided she had had enough. "Camilla, I think I'd like to read in the garden for a while before my classes start," she said innocently. "Of course, but don't take too long. The tutor will arrive in half an hour," Camilla replied. Isabella took one of her favorite books and went out to the spacious garden. The guards patrolled the area, but she knew every nook and cranny of the property. She had discovered a small gap in the back fence, hidden behind some thick bushes. She had thought about escaping before, but had never dared. Today, however, something within her urged her to take that step. With her heart pounding, she slipped through the gap and emerged into an alley that led to a side street. She looked back one last time and began to walk quickly, distancing herself from the mansion. At first, the streets were clean and orderly, but as she went further, the buildings grew older and the sidewalks became more worn. Isabella felt both excited and scared at the same time. She had never been alone in the city. The sounds and smells were overwhelming. Street vendors called out their wares, children ran and played, and life buzzed around her in a way she had never experienced. She stopped at a small park and sat on a bench, watching everything with fascination. An older woman selling flowers approached her. "Would you like a flower, dear?" she asked kindly. Isabella smiled. "I don't have any money." The woman winked at her. "Don't worry, this one is for you." She handed her a small daisy. "Thank you," Isabella replied, feeling a warmth from the gesture that she rarely experienced. She continued on her way, losing herself among the streets and enjoying every moment. Without realizing it, she ventured into a less friendly area. The streets were dirtier, and the people passing by had hard, distrustful looks. She started to feel uncomfortable and decided it was time to return, but she didn't know how to get back. At that moment, a tall, intimidating man approached her. He had a scar on his cheek and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was Hector. "Hello, little girl. Are you lost?" he asked, his voice soft but filled with intent. Isabella took a step back. "I'm fine, thank you." "Come on, you don't need to be afraid. I can help you find your way," Hector insisted, moving closer. Two more men appeared behind him, blocking any escape routes. Isabella felt a knot in her stomach. "Really, I have to go," she said, trying to stay calm. Hector placed a hand on her shoulder. "Not so fast. I think your parents will be very worried about you." Isabella tried to break free, but Hector's grip tightened. "Let me go," she shouted, hoping someone would hear her. A few meters away, John was walking toward his refuge after looking for some food. He heard a girl's scream and stopped. He looked into the alley and saw Isabella being held by the men. Without a second thought, he approached quietly. "Let her go," he said firmly. Hector and his men turned, surprised. "And who are you to interfere in our business?" one of the henchmen snapped. "Someone who won't—" John replied, positioning himself between Isabella and the men. Hector laughed. "Look, a street hero. You'd better step aside if you don't want trouble." John knew he was at a disadvantage, but he couldn't stand by. "The girl is coming with me," he declared. Without further warning, one of the men lunged at John. He dodged the first punch and countered, hitting the attacker in the stomach. But the other two charged at him. A flurry of punches and kicks hit him, but John held firm. With determination, he managed to take down another of the men, but Hector seized the opportunity to pull out a knife. "I warned you," Hector said, advancing with the blade glinting in the dim light. Isabella, terrified, screamed, "Watch out!" John turned just in time to dodge the attack, but the knife grazed his arm, leaving a bleeding wound. Ignoring the pain, he grabbed a metal pipe from the ground and used it to keep Hector at bay. John's movements were precise, the result of someone who had learned to survive on the streets. Finally, police sirens could be heard in the distance. Someone must have alerted the authorities. Hector cursed under his breath. "This isn't over," he threatened, before fleeing with his men. John took a deep breath, holding his injured arm. He turned to Isabella, who had tears in her eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. She nodded, trembling. "Thank you. You saved me. It's dangerous to be alone around here." "Where are your parents?" John inquired. Isabella looked down. "I don't know. I ran away from home." John sighed. "Come on, let's find a safe place, and then we'll figure out how to get you back." He led her to a nearby abandoned building where he could tend to his wound and ensure Isabella was safe. Meanwhile, the sirens drew closer, but John knew the police wouldn't be much help to someone like him. Sitting in the old building, Isabella watched as John tore a piece of his shirt to bandage his arm. "Why did you do that? You could have gotten hurt," she said weakly. John smiled faintly. "I couldn't let anything bad happen to you. No one should face that kind of danger alone." She looked at him intently. "You're very brave." "I just did what anyone should do," he replied, downplaying it. A few minutes passed in silence. Isabella felt a mix of guilt and gratitude. "My parents don't know I'm here. They're probably mad at me." "I'm sure they're worried," John said. "You should go home." Isabella hesitated. "I don't want to go back. They don't listen to me. They don't care." John looked at her with understanding. Sometimes, people don't realize what they have until they lose it. But running away isn't always the solution. She sighed. "I guess you're right. I'll take you as close as I can. It's better for you to be home and safe," John offered. Isabella nodded. "Thank you. You're very kind." John stood up, ignoring the pain in his arm. Together, they started the journey back. Though they tried to stay discreet, it wasn't long before the mansion's guards spotted them. Upon seeing Isabella, they rushed toward her. "Miss Isabella, we've been looking for you everywhere," one of the guards exclaimed. She looked at John with concern. "He saved me. You have to help him." The guards eyed John with suspicion. "Sir, we appreciate your help, but we'll take care of her now." Before he could respond, he felt the guards pulling him away. "Wait," said Isabella, but the guards were already taking her back to the mansion. John watched her leave, feeling a strange sense of loss. He turned around and returned to his refuge, unaware that this encounter would change his life forever. That night, as he settled among his cardboard boxes, John thought about the bravery of the little girl and the injustice of such a young child having to face so much loneliness. For the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of purpose. Perhaps, just perhaps, there were still things worth fighting for. Isabella, in her room, gazed out the window, hoping to see the man who had risked everything to save her again. She knew something had changed inside her, and a determination began to form in her heart. She would do everything possible to find him again, and thank him as he deserved. The soft light of dawn filtered through the cracks in the crumbling walls of the abandoned building where John and Isabella had taken refuge. The night's silence gave way to the distant murmur of the city waking up. John, still sore from the blows and with the wound on his arm covered by a makeshift bandage, watched the girl resting beside him. Isabella, exhausted from the events of the previous day, had fallen into an uneasy sleep. As she slept, John reflected on what had happened. He couldn't help but feel a mix of concern and responsibility. It had been so long since he allowed himself to connect with someone. Isabella's vulnerability stirred protective instincts in him that he thought he had forgotten. He remembered his own son, Daniel, and a pang of pain shot through his chest. Isabella began to stir and slowly opened her eyes. Upon seeing John, a shy smile appeared on her face. "Good morning," she whispered. "Good morning," John replied gently. "How do you feel?" "A bit tired, but I'm okay," she said, sitting up. She looked around, noticing the state of the place. "Is this your home?" John nodded slightly. "It's where I usually spend the nights. It's not much, but it's quiet." She watched him curiously. "Why do you live here? Don't you have a house?" John sighed, thinking about how to explain his situation to a child. "I haven't always lived like this. I used to have a house, a family. But things changed." Isabella tilted her head. "What happened to your family?" There was a moment of silence. John decided to be honest as much as he could. "I lost them a few years ago in an accident. Since then, I've been on my own." Isabella's eyes filled with compassion. "I'm so sorry." "Thank you," he said, forcing a small smile. "And you? Why were you alone in those dangerous streets?" She looked down, nervously fidgeting with her hands. "I ran away. I feel lonely at home. My parents are always busy and never have time for me. I wanted to see what the world outside was like." John nodded, understanding her feeling of loneliness. Sometimes the people surrounded by others feel the loneliest. Isabella looked at him intently. "With you, I feel different. You listen to me." "We all need someone to listen to us," John replied. "But you shouldn't put your safety at risk to find that." She sighed. "I know. It's just that, at home, no one pays attention to me. My parents think they can replace their love with gifts and material things." John thought about life's ironies. Here was a girl who had everything except the most important thing, her parents' love and attention. And he, who had lost all material possessions, but still retained the ability to empathize and care for others. "Maybe if you talked to them, told them how you feel," John suggested. "I've tried, but they're always busy or don't take me seriously," she replied sadly. John placed a comforting hand on Isabella's shoulder. "Don't lose hope. Sometimes adults get lost in their own worries and forget what truly matters." She smiled weakly. "You're very wise." He chuckled softly. "I don't know about wise, but I've learned a few things along the way." They spent a while in silence, each lost in their thoughts. Finally, John said, "It's time for us to head back. Your parents must be very worried." Isabella frowned. "They're probably mad." "It's better to face the consequences than to make them suffer more," John said. "Besides, I can accompany you and make sure you get there safely." She nodded, though a part of her didn't want that moment to end. "Will I see you again?" she asked, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. John hesitated. "I'm not sure it's a good idea. Our worlds are very different." "But that doesn't matter," Isabella insisted. "You're my friend." The word friend resonated with John. It had been so long since he considered himself a friend to anyone. "All right," he finally conceded. "We can meet occasionally, but with caution." Isabella smiled broadly. "It's a promise." They set off. John knew the less traveled paths, avoiding areas that might draw attention. As they neared the more affluent parts of the city, curious and sometimes disdainful glances from passers-by fell upon him. But John stood firm, focused on his mission. Upon reaching a corner near Isabella's mansion, they stopped. "I can't go with you beyond this point," John said. "It's better if you enter alone." Isabella looked at him with concern. "Will you be okay?" He smiled. "I'll be fine. Take care, and remember what we talked about." She nodded, and acting on impulse, gave him a quick hug before running towards her house. John stood there, surprised by the gesture, feeling a warmth he hadn't experienced in a long time. From a distance, he watched as Isabella was greeted by the guards, who immediately escorted her inside. Satisfied that she was safe, John turned and began to head back to his refuge. As he walked, his thoughts crowded in. The encounter with Isabella had stirred feelings and memories he thought were buried. There was something about her innocence and sincerity that gave him hope. Perhaps, after all, there were still good things in the world. At the mansion, Isabella's return caused quite a commotion. Camilla rushed to meet her, embracing her with tears in her eyes. "We were so worried. Where have you been?" she exclaimed. "I'm sorry, Camilla. I got lost, but a friend helped me get back," Isabella explained. Before she could say more, Maria appeared with a severe expression. "Isabella, this is unacceptable. Do you know the scare you've given us?" Isabella looked up, gathering her courage. "I'm sorry, Mum. I just wanted to spend time with you and Dad. I feel so lonely." Maria seemed taken aback by her daughter's words. "We'll talk about this later. Now go to your room." Isabella wanted to protest, but decided it wasn't worth it. She climbed the stairs, feeling like her home was more of a prison than ever. That night, as she tried to sleep, she couldn't stop thinking about John. She decided she would find a way to see him again. He was the only one who understood her, and she didn't want to lose that connection. Meanwhile, John lay on his makeshift bed, staring at the peeling ceiling. He thought about Isabella and how a simple conversation had lightened his burden. Perhaps helping her find her way could also help him heal his own wounds. Fate had intertwined their lives, and although they didn't know it yet, that bond would grow stronger with each passing day. The dawn filtered through the gaps in the cardboard and fabric that made up John's shelter. The distant sounds of the waking city served as his natural alarm. He opened his eyes slowly, still feeling the weight of recent events. His body ached from the blows he received while rescuing Isabella, but an unusual calm filled his spirit. He had found a spark of purpose in helping the girl, something he hadn't felt in a long time. As he sat up, he noticed an unusual noise, the rumbling of nearby engines. He furrowed his brow and stepped out of his shelter to investigate. Before him, parked in front of his humble abode, were 3 black luxury cars that contrasted sharply with the decaying surroundings of the alley. The vehicles gleamed in the morning light, and their tinted windows obscured the interior. John's heart raced. For a moment, he feared it was Hector's men, seeking revenge for thwarting their plan. But something felt different. The doors of the cars opened almost simultaneously, and men dressed in impeccable suits stepped out. Their posture and demeanor exuded authority and professionalism. One of them approached John with a serious expression. "Are you John?" he asked in a firm voice. John nodded cautiously. "Yes, that's me. Who's asking?" The man stepped aside, and from the middle car emerged Andrew, impeccably dressed and wearing an inscrutable expression. His eyes assessed John from head to toe, pausing for a moment on the makeshift bandage on his arm. "So, you're the man who saved my daughter," Andrew said, not extending his hand or offering any friendly gesture. John met his gaze, feeling a mix of discomfort and defiance. "If you're referring to Isabella, yes. I only did what anyone should do." Andrew raised an eyebrow, surprised by the man's frankness. He wasn't used to being spoken to so straightforwardly. "I want to thank you for what you did. My family and I owe you a debt of gratitude." John noted the formality in his words, lacking true emotion. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just glad Isabella is safe." One of Andrew's aides approached with a thick envelope in hand. "This is a token of our gratitude," Andrew said, gesturing to the envelope. "I hope you'll accept it." John looked at the envelope and then back at Andrew. He could sense it contained a substantial amount of money. A pang of indignation hit him. Did he think he could buy his act of kindness? With a calm but firm voice, he replied, "I appreciate the gesture, but I can't accept your money." A murmur of surprise ran through Andrew's men. No one turned down an offer from him. Andrew frowned. "Why not? It could be of great help to you." John stood his ground. "I didn't help your daughter for any personal gain. I did it because it was the right thing to do. I don't need your money." The silence became palpable. Andrew was taken aback. He was not accustomed to being told no. "As you wish," he finally said, putting the envelope away. "But if you change your mind, you can contact me." At that moment, Maria appeared from one of the cars. Her elegance was evident, but her gaze was cold and evaluative. She surveyed the surroundings with disdain before fixing her eyes on John. "So, you're the one who was with my daughter," she said, not attempting to hide her distrust. John nodded politely. "Yes, ma'am. I made sure she returned safely." Maria crossed her arms. "We appreciate your assistance, but I hope you understand that it's best if our lives don't cross paths again." John felt the hostility in her words. "I understand, ma'am. I have no intention of causing you any trouble." She glanced around, noticing the deplorable conditions in which he lived. "It's for everyone's good," she added, before turning to Andrew. "We should leave." Before they could depart, a child's voice broke the silence. "John!" Isabella had emerged from the car, running towards him with a radiant smile. John's eyes softened at the sight of her. "Hello, Isabella." Maria tensed at seeing her daughter approach the man. "Isabella, get back in the car right now," she ordered. But Isabella ignored her mother for a moment. "I wanted to thank you again, and I brought something for you." She pulled out a small bag from her pocket. "It's a lucky charm. I hope it protects you." John took the charm carefully. It was a small stone with a delicate engraving. He felt a lump in his throat. "It's very beautiful." "Thank you." Maria quickly stepped forward and grabbed Isabella by the arm. "You shouldn't be here," she said firmly. "But Mom," Isabella protested. "That's enough," Maria cut in, taking her back to the car. Andrew watched the scene with a mix of discomfort and control. He turned to John one last time. "As I said, if you need anything, contact me." He handed him a card with his information. John took the card out of courtesy, even though he knew he would never use it. "Have a good day," he simply said. The men returned to their cars, and within seconds, the vehicles drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and the echo of engines behind. John stood still, contemplating the charm in his hand and feeling the weight of the card in his pocket. A mix of emotions washed over him: gratitude for Isabella's gesture, frustration at her parents' attitude, and an unease he couldn't explain. Back in the car, Maria reprimanded Isabella. "You shouldn't approach strangers, especially people like him." Isabella frowned. "He's not a stranger, Mom. He's my friend. He saved me." "That doesn't make him trustworthy," Maria replied. "I don't want you to see him again." "But Mom," she tried to protest. "No buts. It's for your safety," Maria concluded in a definitive tone. Andrew watched the argument from the rearview mirror. Although he shared some of his wife's concerns, something in Isabella's reaction made him feel a pang of guilt. Was he being too harsh? He shook his head, focusing on the matters at hand. Meanwhile, John returned to his shelter. He sat on the ground, contemplating the charm. He thought about Isabella's sincerity and her parents' coldness. How could such a warm girl come from such a frigid environment? He tucked the charm into his pocket, feeling it was a small ray of light in his life. David stumbled in, his eyes glassy. "Who were those guys?" he asked curiously. "Just grateful people," John replied evasively. David chuckled sarcastically. "Don't tell me you've made rich friends now." John smiled slightly. It's not something that matters. David shrugged. Be careful, friend. Those people only bring trouble. I'll keep that in mind, John affirmed. As the day wore on, John couldn't shake the image of Isabella and Maria's words from his mind. He knew their worlds were different, but he felt a genuine connection with the girl. He decided that, for her sake, it would be best to keep his distance. However, fate had other plans. In the mansion, Isabella locked herself in her room, frustrated by her parents' attitude. She decided she wouldn't let them prohibit her from seeing John. He was the only one who understood her, and she wasn't going to give up that friendship. She began to devise ways to visit him again without anyone knowing. Meanwhile, Maria expressed her concerns to Andrew. I don't like Isabella being around that man. We know nothing about him. Andrew sighed. He saved her life. Maybe we should be more considerate. Being considerate doesn't mean putting our daughter at risk, Maria countered. People like him are just looking to take advantage. I offered him money, and he turned it down, Andrew pointed out. And doesn't that seem suspicious to you? Maria insisted. Maybe he wants something more. Andrew didn't respond immediately. Deep down, he shared some of his wife's doubts, but he also felt there was something different about John. He decided it would be best to keep things under control. That night, as the lights of the city shone in the distance, John gazed at the stars from his shelter. He held Isabella's charm, feeling a warmth that was strange, yet comforting. Although Maria's words had been harsh, he couldn't help but feel that something good had emerged from all of this. However, he was unaware that the decisions made that day would mark the beginning of a series of events that would test his strength and change his life irreversibly. Days passed with apparent normalcy in the Herrera mansion. However, for Isabella, every minute was an opportunity to plan her next encounter with John. Her parents' prohibition only fueled her determination. She knew she had to be careful not to raise suspicions, but her longing to see her friend outweighed any fear. One afternoon, after her private lessons, Isabella approached Camilla with an innocent smile. Camilla, could you help me choose a book in the library? I want something new to read tonight. Camilla, always accommodating, nodded. Of course, dear. Let's go together. As they browsed the shelves filled with old and new volumes, Isabella pretended to be interested in various titles. When she found the right moment, she said, Oh, I forgot my bookmark in my room. Could you wait for me here? I won't take long. Sure, I'll wait here, Camilla replied, absorbed in one of the books. Isabella quickly exited the library, but instead of heading to her room, she slipped toward the back entrance of the mansion. She knew the guards' schedules and was aware she had a window of time before they noticed her absence. She climbed through the same gap in the fence she had used before and ventured into the streets of the city. Her heart raced with excitement and nervousness. She had packed a small backpack with food and a blanket she had taken from her room. She wanted to bring something for John, to show him that she valued their friendship. After a few minutes of walking and recalling the path she had taken before, she arrived at the alley where she remembered John's shelter. She found him sitting on a step, gazing at the horizon with a thoughtful air. John! Isabella exclaimed, running toward him. John turned, surprised. Upon seeing her, he quickly stood up. Isabella, what are you doing here? It's dangerous for you to be alone in this place. She smiled, unable to contain her joy. I had to see you. I brought you some things. She showed him the backpack. John sighed, though he couldn't help feeling touched. You shouldn't have come. If your parents find out, they won't. I was careful, she assured him. Besides, I wanted to spend time with you. He looked at her seriously, but the sweetness in Isabella's eyes melted his objections. All right, but only for a little while. And next time, let me know, and I'll see how we can meet in a safer place. They sat together on an old bench that offered a panoramic view of the city. Isabella began to take out the food from her backpack, sandwiches, fruit, and some treats. I hope you like them, she said, offering him one. Thank you, John replied, taking a sandwich. "You didn't have to go through the trouble." "It's the least I can do. You've been very kind to me," she said, as she took a bite of an apple. Hours passed as they conversed. Isabella shared stories about her classes, her favorite books, and how she sometimes felt like a prisoner in her own home. John, in turn, recounted tales from his life before the accident, happy moments with his wife and son. He spoke of Daniel, his son, and how much he loved playing soccer. "It must have been very hard to lose them," Isabella said empathetically. John nodded, lost in thought. "It was. It still is. But meeting you has reminded me that there are still good things in the world." Isabella smiled. "I'm glad I can help you, just like you helped me." As the sun began to set, John insisted it was time for her to go back. "I don't want them to worry about you. Besides, it's safer if you return before it gets dark." "Okay," she agreed, "but I promise I'll be back." "Only if we have a safer plan," John replied. "I don't want you taking risks." "I promise," said Isabella, crossing her fingers as a sign of her oath. In the following weeks, their visits became more frequent and organized. Isabella found excuses to leave the mansion, whether it was under the pretext of taking art classes or visiting a fictional friend. She was always careful not to raise suspicion, and Camilla, unknowingly, facilitated her escapades. During one of these visits, as they walked through a local market, Isabella noticed that John seemed distracted. "Are you okay?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "I was just thinking about David. I haven't seen him in days. I'm worried something has happened to him." "Is David your friend?" she inquired. "Yes, he's a good man, but he has problems with certain things," he explained, not going into detail about David's addiction. "We can look for him together," Isabella suggested enthusiastically. "No, it's not a safe environment for you," John said firmly, "but I appreciate your concern." Isabella reluctantly accepted. "If there's anything I can do to help, just let me know." John smiled. "Your company is already a great help." As their friendship blossomed, they both began to feel internal changes. John noticed that his emotional heaviness was lifting. Isabella's laughter, curiosity, and innocence reminded him of the happy moments he had shared with his own family. He felt that protecting and guiding her gave him a new sense of purpose. Isabella, for her part, saw in John a father figure she had never had. She appreciated his honesty, wisdom, and the way he listened to her without judgment. With him, she could be herself without the expectations and pressures of her surroundings. However, not everything was simple. One afternoon, as Isabella was returning home, she was intercepted by Camilla. "Isabella, where have you been? I've been looking for you everywhere." The girl tried to remain calm. "I was in the garden. Maybe you didn't see me." Camilla looked at her with concern. "You know you can trust me. If there's anything you want to tell me..." Isabella hesitated for a moment. She felt the weight of her lies and escapades. "I'm fine, Camilla. I just needed a little fresh air." The nanny sighed. "That's all right, but please don't wander off without letting me know. You know how your parents get." "I know. I'm sorry," said Isabella, hugging her. Meanwhile, in the mansion, Maria sensed that something was amiss. Although her relationship with Isabella had always been distant, she perceived changes in her daughter's behavior. She decided to investigate discreetly, asking one of the guards to watch her daughter's movements. One night, John was in his shelter, contemplating the charm Isabella had given him. He thought about how his life had changed since meeting her. He wondered if it was right to allow such a young girl to get involved in his complicated world. David suddenly appeared, looking worse than usual. "John, I need help," he stammered. John approached quickly. "What's wrong, David?" They're looking for me. I owe money and I don't know what to do," he confessed desperately. John knew that David's problems could bring dangerous consequences. "Calm down. We'll find a solution. But you need to stay away from those people." David nodded, though his lost gaze indicated he was on the brink of despair. The next day, Isabella arrived at their meeting spot, but John was not there. She waited patiently, but he didn't show up. Worried, she decided to search for him at his shelter. When she arrived, she found John tending to David, who was in bad shape. "What happened to him?" she asked, alarmed. John was surprised to see her. "Isabella, I told you this place isn't safe." "I know, but I was worried. Can I help with anything?" He hesitated, but saw the determination in her eyes. "All right. I need clean water and some bandages. Do you think you can get them?" "Yes, of course," she affirmed, ready to do whatever it took. They worked together to care for David. Isabella watched as John treated his friend with patience and care. She admired his dedication and realized that he also needed support. "John, you don't have to carry it all alone," she said softly. He looked at her gratefully. "Sometimes, it's not easy to accept help, but thank you." That moment strengthened their bond even more. They both understood that their friendship provided not only companionship, but also the strength to face their challenges. However, Isabella's actions did not go unnoticed. The guard assigned by Maria had discreetly followed her, and now had evidence of her visits to the more dangerous parts of the city. He reported to Maria immediately. That night, Isabella returned to the mansion unsuspecting. But upon entering, she found her parents waiting for her in the main living room. Maria had a severe expression, and Andrew looked worried. "Isabella, we need to talk," Maria announced in a tense voice. The girl felt a chill. "What's going on?" "We know you've been sneaking out and visiting that man," her mother continued. "We told you not to see him again." Isabella lifted her chin defiantly. "John is my friend. He listens to me and understands me. I'm not doing anything wrong." "It's dangerous and completely unacceptable," Andrew interjected. "You can't keep behaving this way." "You're never here for me. John cares more about me than you do," she exclaimed, letting out her pent-up frustration. Maria seemed taken aback by her words. "We are your parents, and we know what's best for you." "Then prove it," Isabella shot back before running to her room. Andrew sighed, rubbing a hand across his face. "This is getting out of hand." Maria pressed her lips together. "We need to take action. That man is a bad influence, and I won't allow our daughter to be put in danger." Meanwhile, John felt a growing unease. He knew Isabella's visits could bring trouble. He decided he needed to talk to her and explain that for her safety, they shouldn't continue seeing each other. Although it pained him, it was the best decision for both of them. The next day, Isabella went to their usual meeting place, but John wasn't there. She waited and waited, but he didn't show up. Confused and sad, she returned home. In his shelter, John contemplated the charm, wrestling with his feelings. He wanted to protect Isabella, but he wasn't sure if distancing himself from her was the solution. The connection they had formed was real and deep, and they both needed it. Tension was rising, and the decisions they made going forward would define the course of their lives. Maria and Andrew's actions, driven by fear and control, would only serve to complicate matters further. The fates of John and Isabella were intertwined, and no obstacle could easily break that bond. The city, cloaked in night, revealed its darkest face. In shadowy alleys and forgotten places, the most terrible secrets were whispered among shadows. Hector, with a scar running across his left eyebrow, met with his men in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts. The defeat he suffered at the hands of John still burned in his pride. Not only had he lost the opportunity for a substantial ransom by failing to kidnap Isabella, but he had also been humiliated by a mere vagabond. He slammed a fist on the table, causing the empty glasses on it to rattle. "I can't believe that nobody ruined our plans," he growled, his eyes filled with rage. One of his henchmen, a thin man with tattoos snaking down his arms, dared to speak. "Boss, that guy is tougher than he looks. Maybe we should just let it go. Hector spun around abruptly. Let it go? Let a homeless man make us look foolish? No. This is personal. Besides, there's more to this story than meets the eye. He pulled out a worn manila envelope and tossed it onto the table. I've been doing some digging, he announced, and I've discovered something very interesting about the girl's father, Andrew Herrera. The men leaned in, curious. Hector pulled out photos and documents from the envelope. Andrew isn't the upstanding businessman everyone thinks he is. He has a dark past filled with dirty deals and alliances with dangerous people. And the best part is that he's desperate to keep it hidden. One of the men picked up a photo. And what do we gain from this? He asked. Hector smiled wickedly. We'll make him an offer. If he helps me get rid of John and achieve what I want, his secrets will stay buried. If not, I'll make sure everything comes to light. Meanwhile, in another corner of the city, Julia Morales, an investigative journalist known for her tenacity, was reviewing notes and clippings in her small apartment. She had been following leads on a series of recent criminal activities, and the failed kidnapping of Isabella Herrera had caught her attention. Something didn't add up. Why would someone risk kidnapping the daughter of one of the most powerful men in the city without a solid plan? Julia had a hunch that there was a more complex web behind that attempt. With her brown hair pulled into a messy bun and surrounded by empty coffee cups, she delved into police reports and testimonies. Her instinct told her that Hector was involved, but she needed proof. She decided to visit the neighborhood where the kidnapping attempt had taken place. As she walked through the streets, she spoke with shopkeepers and local residents. Many were reluctant to talk, fearful of reprisals, but she eventually found an elderly woman who, after ensuring no one was listening, said, I heard that a homeless man saved the girl, an anonymous hero. Do you know where I can find him? Julia asked with interest. The old woman pointed east. They say he's sometimes seen by the old buildings near the river. Julia thanked her and headed in that direction. She knew that finding this man could be the key to uncovering the truth. Meanwhile, in the Herrera mansion, Andrew was reviewing documents in his office when he received a phone call. Upon answering, Hector's cold voice echoed on the other end. Andrew, we need to talk. Andrew tensed. I don't know who you are or what you're talking about. Oh, I think you know very well who I am, Hector replied. And I know many things about you that you would prefer to keep hidden. There was a tense silence before Andrew responded. What do you want? A meeting. Tomorrow at midnight at the docks. Just you, Hector instructed before hanging up. Andrew felt a cold sweat trickle down his back. He couldn't afford a scandal. His empire had been built not only on legitimate business, but also on deals that could never see the light of day. If Hector had evidence, he was in serious trouble. That night, Andrew grappled with whether to attend the meeting or seek another solution. He decided not to inform Maria. He didn't want to alarm her or expose her more than necessary. The next day, Julia continued her search. Finally, she found John sitting on a bench near the river, lost in thought as he gazed at the water. She approached cautiously. John, she called out. He looked up, surprised that someone knew his name. Do I know you? He replied with suspicion. I'm Julia Morales, a journalist. I'm investigating the attempted kidnapping of Isabella Herrera. I've been told that you saved her, she explained, showing him her badge. John frowned. I have nothing to say. Please, I just want to understand what happened. I think there's something bigger behind this, and we could help a lot of people if the truth comes out, Julia insisted. He hesitated. He knew that speaking could bring him trouble, but he also felt that there were things that needed to be revealed. Finally, he nodded. All right, but not here. They headed to a modest cafe where Julia offered him a warm drink. John recounted how he had found Isabella and the events that followed. While he omitted personal details, he provided enough information for Julia to connect the dots. Have you had more contact with Isabella? She asked. John hesitated. We've seen each other a few times, but I think it's better for her to stay away from me. I don't want to cause her any trouble." Julia took notes quickly. "And what about Hector? Have you heard from him again?" "No, but I know he's dangerous. I wouldn't be surprised if he was planning something," John admitted. Julia thanked him for his time and offered help if he needed it. "If I find out anything that could affect you, I'll let you know," she promised. That night, Andrew arrived at the docks, wrapped in a long coat and looking nervous. The waves lapped gently against the pillars, and the moon reflected on the water. Hector emerged from the shadows, accompanied by 2 of his men. "Andrew, so punctual," he said with a cynical smile. "Let's get to the point. What do you want?" Andrew asked, trying to maintain his composure. Hector pulled out a folder and extended it to him. "Here are copies of documents proving your dealings with certain entities. If this gets into the hands of the press or authorities, your empire will collapse like a house of cards." Andrew flipped through the documents, recognizing with horror the evidence of his illegal activities. "What do you want in exchange for this?" "It's simple. I want you to help me get rid of John. That bastard has caused me a lot of problems, and I have unfinished business with him," Hector declared. "Why should I get involved in your personal vendettas?" Andrew retorted. Hector stepped closer, his eyes glinting with malice. "Because if you don't, your life as you know it will be over. Besides, I understand your daughter has been spending time with him. You wouldn't want him to keep influencing her, would you?" Andrew felt a mix of anger and fear. He couldn't allow his secrets to be revealed, nor could he let Isabella continue in contact with someone who could expose him. "What exactly do you propose?" "I want access to your resources, information, means to locate him and eliminate him. You keep your hands clean, and I'll handle the problem," Hector explained. Andrew looked to the horizon, grappling with his conscience. He knew it was wrong, but he felt he had no choice. "All right, but I want this done quickly and without leaving traces." "I knew you'd understand," Hector smiled, extending his hand. Andrew shook it, sealing a dark pact. Meanwhile, Julia was returning to her apartment, reviewing the notes from her conversation with John. She decided to dig deeper into Andrew Herrera's past. She accessed public records and, after hours of research, began to uncover inconsistencies and connections to ghost companies. She contacted an anonymous source who provided valuable information about suspicious transactions and ties to organized crime. "This is bigger than I imagined," she thought to herself. She knew she was treading dangerous ground, but her commitment to the truth pushed her to keep going. In the mansion, Maria noticed Andrew's restless behavior. "Is everything all right?" she asked one night during dinner. "Yes, just business matters," he replied evasively. Isabella, sitting at the table, silently observed her parents. She felt the tension in the air and deeply missed John. She had tried to contact him, but he seemed to have disappeared. She decided she had to find him, no matter the consequences. The next day, taking advantage of a lapse in attention, she escaped the mansion again. She headed to their usual meeting spot, but John wasn't there. She asked some of the homeless people in the area, and one of them said, "I think I saw him heading toward the old warehouse by the river." Without a second thought, Isabella made her way there. Upon arriving, she found John sitting on a dock, staring pensively at the water. "John!" she exclaimed upon seeing him. He turned, surprised. "Isabella, what are you doing here? It's dangerous." "I had to see you. I was worried," she said, approaching. John sighed. "You shouldn't have come. Things are getting complicated." "What's going on?" she asked, concerned. Before he could respond, John noticed movement in the shadows. "We need to leave now," he warned, taking Isabella's hand. But it was too late. Several men appeared, surrounding them. Hector stepped forward, a satisfied smile on his face. "Well, well, what a touching reunion." John pushed Isabella behind him. "Let her go. This is between you and me." "It would be, but now the little one is here. And that makes things more interesting," Hector mocked. Isabella looked at him fearfully. "What do you want?" Hector stared at her intently. "Your father and I have unfinished business, and you're a valuable piece in this game." John clenched his fists. "Don't involve her. She has nothing to do with this." "It's too late for that," Hector replied. At that moment, a phone rang. Hector answered quickly. "Yes, I understand. I'll take care of it." He hung up and looked at his men. "Change of plans. Take them." John fought back, but he was outnumbered. Isabella screamed, but no one could hear her in that isolated spot. As they were taken away, Julia, who had followed leads to the dock, watched from a distance in horror. She pulled out her phone and called the police, providing her location. She knew she had to act quickly. Back at the mansion, Maria discovered that Isabella was missing. Desperate, she confronted Andrew. "Our daughter is gone. Where is she?" Feeling the weight of his decisions, Andrew grabbed the phone and called Hector. "What have you done?" he demanded. "I'm just fulfilling our agreement. Don't worry, everything will be fine," Hector replied coldly before hanging up. Andrew felt his world collapsing. He had put his own daughter in danger. Tension reached its peak. John and Isabella were in danger. Andrew faced the consequences of his actions, and Julia was determined to reveal the truth. The lives of all of them were about to collide in an inevitable outcome. As they were taken to an unknown location, John looked at Isabella and whispered, "I promise I'll get you out of this." She nodded, fully trusting him. Despite the danger, she felt that together they could overcome any obstacle. Danger lurked around every corner, and the decisions made in the shadows would soon come to light, forever changing the lives of everyone involved. The night descended upon the city like a cloak of shadows. In the streets, the lights flickered, but in the hearts of some, the darkness ran deeper. Andrew found himself in his office, contemplating the reflection of his face in the window. Hector's call echoed in his mind. He had made a decision that tormented him, to ally with a criminal to protect his secrets and, consequently, his empire. Meanwhile, Isabella, unaware of her father's machinations, decided once again to seek out John. She sensed that something was wrong. During the last time she had tried to contact him, he had been distant. Taking advantage of Maria being occupied and the guards distracted, she escaped the mansion and headed to the place where she used to meet her friend. John was in his shelter, feeling restless. He knew that allowing Isabella to keep visiting him was risky, but the connection they had formed was too strong to break easily. When he saw her approaching, a mix of joy and concern flooded his chest. "Isabella, you shouldn't be here," he said softly, unable to hide a smile. "I had to see you. I feel like something bad is happening," she replied, getting closer. Before they could exchange more words, an unusual noise alerted them. From the shadows emerged several figures. Hector and his men had arrived. John understood immediately that they had fallen into a trap. "Well, what a touching reunion," Hector said with a sardonic smile. "Just what I needed." John positioned himself between Hector and Isabella. "Let her go. This is between you and me." Hector shook his head. "I'm afraid you're both part of the game now." With a gesture, his men surrounded John and Isabella, preventing any escape. With no option, they were taken to a dark van and transported to an unknown location. During the ride, Isabella squeezed John's hand tightly. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm here with you," he assured her. "I won't let anything happen to you." They arrived at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. They were forced inside and seated in chairs, their hands tied. Hector strolled in front of them, relishing the power he had at that moment. "Your father must be very worried about you, Isabella," he commented with feigned concern. "Perhaps he'll be more willing to cooperate now." Isabella looked at him defiantly. "What do you want from him?" "Just what's rightfully mine," he replied evasively. Then he turned to John. "And you? You're just an inconvenience that needs to be eliminated." John observed him calmly. "If this is between you and Andrew, keep the girl out of this." Hector laughed. "Things aren't that simple. Besides, Andrew and I have a longer history than you can imagine." Hours later, in the Herrera mansion, Maria discovered that Isabella wasn't in her room. Desperation overtook her, and she immediately called Andrew. "Isabella is missing! She's nowhere to be found!" she exclaimed over the phone. Andrew, aware of the possible implications, felt a knot in his stomach. "Calm down. We'll find her," he said, trying to sound convincing. He hung up and quickly dialed Hector's number. "What have you done? Do you have my daughter?" he demanded. Hector replied coldly, "She's with me. Consider this an incentive for you to fulfill your part of the deal." "This isn't what we agreed on," Andrew protested. "Circumstances change," Hector retorted. "If you want to see her again, you know what you have to do." Andrew hung up, overwhelmed with guilt and fear. He realized that his actions had put Isabella in danger. He needed a solution, but he didn't know whom to trust. Meanwhile, in the warehouse, Isabella seized a moment when Hector and his men stepped away to speak quietly with John. "I think my father is involved in all this," she confessed, tears shining in her eyes. John looked at her in surprise. "Why do you say that?" "I've overheard conversations at home, things about dark businesses and secret deals, and they mentioned your name," she explained. "I think my father is behind what happened to your family." John felt as if the ground was opening beneath his feet. "It can't be," he murmured, struggling to maintain his composure. Isabella squeezed his hand. "I'm so sorry, John. I didn't know how to tell you before." He took a deep breath, trying to process the information. "It's not your fault," he reassured her. "But now I understand why they're doing this." At that moment, Julia, the journalist, arrived at the warehouse. She had followed leads and rumors that had brought her there. From a safe position, she observed the situation and decided to call the police. She knew she needed evidence to back her investigation and, more importantly, to rescue John and Isabella. Inside the warehouse, Hector returned with a satisfied expression. "Well, it seems your father is considering my terms," he said to Isabella. "Maybe this will all end soon." John took the opportunity to confront him. "Why are you doing this? What do you really want?" Hector looked at him with disdain. "Want the truth? Andrew and I have been in business together for years, but lately he's been trying to get rid of me to clean up his image. I'm not going to let him betray me." "And what do I have to do with all this?" John asked. "You knew too much and got in the way of my plans. Plus, getting rid of you will be a favor to Andrew. Everyone wins," Hector explained coldly. Outside, police sirens began to sound. Hector frowned. "Looks like we have company," he said, turning to his men. "Get ready. We won't let them catch us." Amid the chaos, John saw an opportunity. "Isabella, when I tell you, run toward the back door," he whispered. "But what about you?" she asked worriedly. "Don't worry about me. Just promise me you'll run," he insisted. The police surrounded the building, using megaphones to demand their surrender. Hector, furious, ordered his men to prepare for a confrontation. At that moment, John freed himself from the ropes that bound him. He had been working on the knots for a while, and pushed one of the henchmen, destabilizing the situation. "Now!" he shouted to Isabella. She ran with all her might toward the back door. One of the men tried to stop her, but Julia appeared in her path, hitting him with a metal pipe she had found. "Come on, Isabella," she urged. Together they burst out of the warehouse and found themselves safe with the police officers, who immediately secured them. Inside, John faced Hector. "This ends now," he declared. Hector pulled out a gun and aimed it at John. "Not so fast. You won't leave here alive." Before he could pull the trigger, an officer burst in and ordered, "Drop the weapon." Hector, cornered, attempted to shoot, but the officer was quicker and disarmed him. Within minutes, Hector and his men were arrested. John exited the warehouse, exhausted but relieved. Outside, Isabella ran to him and hugged him tightly. "You're okay," she whispered. "Thanks to you," he replied, returning the embrace. Maria arrived shortly afterward, accompanied by Andrew. Upon seeing her daughter safe and sound, Maria cried tears of relief. "Isabella!" she exclaimed, hugging her. Isabella pulled back slightly and looked at her father with a mix of pain and disappointment. "Dad, we need to talk." Andrew avoided her gaze. "What matters is that you're safe." "No, what matters is the truth," she insisted. "I know what you've done." Maria looked at them, confused. "What are you talking about?" Isabella took a breath. "Dad has been involved in illegal dealings, and I think it's connected to John's family." Maria turned to Andrew, incredulous. "Is this true?" Andrew stammered. I just wanted to protect you. I did what I thought was necessary." John stepped forward. "Were you involved in the accident that killed my wife and son?" Andrew lowered his head. "It was a mistake, a cover-up. I didn't think anyone would get hurt." Anger and pain reflected in John's eyes. "Because of you, I lost everything." Maria, shocked, looked at her husband. "How could you? This is unforgivable." The police approached. "Mr. Herrera, we need you to come with us to answer some questions." Andrew nodded resignedly. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." As he was taken away, Isabella hugged her mother. "I'm so sorry, Mom." Maria stroked her hair. "It's not your fault, dear. We'll get through this together." Julia approached John. "I have enough information to expose all of this. The truth will come out." John nodded. "It's for the best. No one else should suffer because of Andrew's secrets." Isabella looked at John with eyes full of gratitude and sadness. "Thank you for everything. I'm sorry you had to go through this." He smiled weakly. "What matters is that you're safe. And now, we can both start to heal." The chaos began to dissipate, but the consequences of Andrew's actions were just starting to manifest. Everyone's lives had changed forever, but amid betrayal and pain, an opportunity for redemption and forgiveness emerged. The night was still young, but the first light of dawn promised a new beginning. The atmosphere in the warehouse was tense. Shadows danced with the flickering light of an old bulb. John carefully observed the place, searching for any opportunity to escape. His hands, tied with ropes, were beginning to numb, but his mind was more alert than ever. Isabella, sitting beside him, looked at him with eyes full of trust. "I know we'll find a way out," she whispered. John nodded. "I need you to trust me," he replied softly. He had noticed that one of Hector's men, tasked with watching them, was easily distracted by his phone. Seizing a moment when the guard stepped away, John began to rub the ropes against the sharp edge of an exposed pipe. After several minutes of silent effort, he managed to free himself. Without wasting time, he untied Isabella's hands. "When I signal, run toward the back door," he told her. Just then, Hector burst in abruptly. "Did you think I wouldn't notice your escape attempts?" he said with a malicious grin. "You're more cunning than I thought, but the game ends here." John stepped in front of Isabella, shielding her. "Let her go, Hector. This is between you and me." Hector pulled out a knife and advanced. "Always so heroic, but you have no options left." At that instant, John grabbed a nearby box and threw it at Hector, knocking him off balance. "Now, Isabella!" he shouted. The girl ran toward the back door as John lunged at Hector. The two men engaged in a fierce struggle. Hector, younger and armed, seemed to have the advantage, but John, driven by the determination to protect Isabella, fought fiercely. Hector managed to inflict a superficial wound on John's arm, but that didn't stop him. With a quick movement, John disarmed Hector and struck him, leaving him dazed on the ground. Outside, Isabella found Julia and a group of police officers who had arrived thanks to the journalist. "John is inside. He needs help," she exclaimed. The officers entered the warehouse just as John emerged, holding Hector. "Here's the man you're looking for," he said, handing him over to the authorities. Hector, handcuffed, shot John one last look of hatred. "This isn't over," he threatened. John, exhausted but relieved, reunited with Isabella. "You're safe," he said, smiling weakly. She hugged him tightly. "Thank you for protecting me." Julia approached. "You did a great job, John. Thanks to you, Hector will be brought to justice." John nodded. "I just want all of this to be over." As the police took Hector and his accomplices away, the dawn began to light up the horizon. A new chapter was beginning for all of them, leaving behind the darkness of past days. After the events at the warehouse, Julia worked tirelessly to gather all the evidence obtained. Her investigation into Andrew Herrera revealed a network of corruption, money laundering, and ties to criminal activities. Determined to expose the truth, she published a lengthy article that shook the foundations of society. The news spread quickly. Media outlets replicated the story, and public opinion turned against Andrew. His business partners distanced themselves, and the shares of his companies plummeted. Authorities launched an official investigation, freezing his accounts and ordering his preventive arrest. In the mansion, Maria read the article in disbelief. Although she knew something was wrong, she never imagined the magnitude of her husband's actions. With a heavy heart, she confronted Andrew when he returned home under police custody to collect some belongings. "Is this all true?" Maria asked, her eyes filled with pain. Andrew avoided her gaze. "I did what I thought was necessary to protect our family," he murmured. "At what cost?" "You've destroyed everything we had," she replied. Isabella, watching from the stairs, felt a mix of sadness and liberation. While it was painful to see her family crumble, she knew the truth had to come to light. Maria made a firm decision. "I can't stay with you. Isabella and I will start anew, away from all this." Andrew nodded, aware that he had lost the most valuable thing. "I'm sorry," he whispered, as the officers escorted him out. In the following days, Maria and Isabella began to rebuild their lives with simplicity and honesty. They found support in John, who, despite everything, offered them his friendship. Together, they began to heal the wounds of the past, looking toward a more hopeful future. The sun shone with a gentle warmth over the city, heralding a new day full of possibilities. John walked through the streets that had once been his home, but this time with a different perspective. After the recent events and Andrew's downfall, he had received an unexpected offer from Maria and Isabella to live with them and start a new life together. Sitting on a park bench, John reflected on the proposal. He deeply appreciated the gesture and the affection they had shown him, but he felt that his path lay elsewhere. As he watched children playing and families enjoying the day, he decided that he wanted to help those who, like him in the past, had no place to call home. Later, he met with Maria and Isabella in a cozy cafe. "I really appreciate your offer," John began sincerely, "but I've decided that I want to do something different. I want to establish a shelter for homeless people, a place where they can find support and a chance to rebuild their lives." Maria nodded, understanding his intentions. "That's a wonderful idea. We'd like to help you in any way we can," she offered. Isabella smiled with enthusiasm. "I want to help too. I could organize activities and collect donations." John felt moved by her enthusiasm. "It would mean a lot to me to have your support." With Maria's help, who used some of her resources to fund the project, preparations began to establish the shelter. They found an old but solid building that could be renovated. David, John's friend who had struggled with addiction, was one of the first to join the project. "Thank you for not giving up on me," David said to John as they painted one of the rooms. "I want to be part of this and help others just like you helped me." John patted him on the shoulder. "We all deserve a second chance." The shelter, named New Hope, opened its doors weeks later. It offered hot meals, clean beds, and, most importantly, job reintegration programs and emotional support. News of the shelter spread quickly, attracting volunteers and donors interested in contributing. Julia, the journalist, wrote an article highlighting the positive impact of the shelter on the community. In the shadows of the city, a light of hope arises thanks to people like John and those who believe in a better future, she wrote. Isabella, inspired by the work at the shelter, decided to focus her studies on social work. "I want to dedicate my life to helping others, just like you do," she told John. He smiled proudly. "You have a big heart, Isabella. You will do great things." Maria, for her part, found a new mission in the shelter. She became actively involved in administration and in creating educational programs for the residents. "I never imagined this would be the path my life would take, but I feel more fulfilled than ever," she confessed on one occasion. Time passed, and the shelter became a cornerstone of the community. People who once lived on the streets now had jobs, homes, and a renewed purpose. David took on a leadership role, coordinating activities and serving as an example for others. One afternoon, as the sun set on the horizon, John sat in the shelter's garden, watching people share laughter and conversations. Isabella approached and sat beside him. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how things have changed," he replied. "Not long ago I was lost and aimless. Now I look around and see how, together, we've created something beautiful." Isabella nodded. "You've been an inspiration to all of us. I'm glad I met you." "The feeling is mutual," John said, smiling. "You showed me that there are always reasons to keep moving forward." The wind gently brushed their faces, carrying away the laughter and happy conversations of the shelter. They both sat in silence, enjoying the moment and the satisfaction of knowing that, despite the adversities, they had found a new purpose. The story of John, Isabella, Maria, David, and Julia was a testament to the power of resilience, love, and solidarity. They had transformed pain and loss into hope and opportunity, demonstrating that even in the darkest moments, light can prevail. With the shelter New Hope as a symbol of their journey, they looked to the future with optimism. United by the bonds they had forged, they knew they could face any challenge that came their way. The story teaches us that kindness and altruism can transcend social barriers and profoundly change lives. Selfless acts, like John saving Isabella, can trigger chains of events that lead to redemption and positive change. Additionally, it highlights that true value does not lie in material wealth, but in empathy, love, and the ability to help others. Even amid adversity, it is possible to find purpose and build a better future when we act with integrity and compassion. And so we conclude the inspiring story of John and Isabella, a tale that reminds us of the power of love, resilience, and kindness. If this story touched your heart as much as it did ours, we invite you to like the video and share it with your friends and family. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss more exciting stories that invite us to reflect. Let us know in the comments what you liked most about this story and what lesson you take away. We would love to hear from you.